The city always slept uneasily, its lights flickering like restless thoughts against the horizon, but the outskirts held a quieter kind of darkness, one that felt older, as if it remembered things humans had forgotten. That was where Saren walked, his steps slow and deliberate, guiding the three students through patches of silver grass stirred by the night breeze. None of them knew why they followed him so willingly. Perhaps it was the way he moved, as though the world drifted around him rather than the other way around. Or perhaps it was the strange stirring each of them had been feeling lately, a pull beneath the surface of their thoughts, like a memory pressing to be born. Lisa was the first to notice how the air changed. As they turned down a narrow path half swallowed by overgrown vines, a cool heaviness settled over them. It wasn't frightening, just unfamiliar, like stepping into a dream where the rules were different but somehow made sense anyway. Corin stayed close behind her, clutching his backpack strap a little tighter. Merrick followed last, his usual skepticism hanging in the air like an exhale he hadn't released yet. Saren didn't speak as he led them to an old fence hidden under layers of ivy. The wood, though cracked and weathered, seemed strangely intact, as if time had tried but failed to touch it. Saren slipped through a gap in the boards and gestured for them to follow. "Just a little farther," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yet the words carried clearly, as if the space around them leaned in to listen. Beyond the fence lay a forgotten garden, untended, untouched, and impossibly still. Moonlight filtered through the branches in soft sheets, gathering on the stone paths like scattered silver. The air here felt denser, almost alive. Lisa caught her breath. She couldn't explain it, but she felt as though the garden recognized her, like an old friend she hadn't seen in lifetimes. Corin rubbed his arms. "This place feels wrong." Saren turned to him gently. "Not wrong," he said. "Just unfiltered. The world you know is layered with nets and veils. Here, there are fewer of them." Merrick stepped onto the stone path and frowned at its crescent shape. "What is this place? Some old temple or something?" "You could call it that," Saren replied. "Though temple isn't quite the right word. This is where remembering comes easier." The three students exchanged uneasy glances. Saren moved toward a stone bench at the center of the garden. Moss covered much of it, but beneath the green, faint engravings curled across its surface, patterns that seemed to shift when looked at directly. Saren brushed the moss aside with a slow hand. "What I'm about to tell you," he said, "is something your world tried very hard to hide. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was liberating." Merrick raised an eyebrow. "Is this about the they you mentioned earlier? Because you still haven't explained who exactly they are." Saren's expression softened, though a shadow passed through his eyes. "The Archons," he said quietly. "They were born from the fractures of consciousness itself, entities who learn to manipulate the spaces where thought becomes form. They do not rule the world. They shape the illusions you mistake for it." Lisa swallowed hard. She felt something twist inside her chest, a tug of familiarity, as though she'd heard the name long ago. "You're saying they control everything?" "No," Saren corrected gently. "They influence the angles through which you see everything. They cannot create light, so they learn to harvest it. Not through violence, but through forgetfulness. They whisper doubts, sculpt fears, weave stories about unworthiness, until humans shrink themselves enough for the Archons to feed." Corin's voice cracked. "Feed? On what?" "On the brightness you lose when you forget who you are," Saren said softly. "Awareness is light. And when awareness dims, it releases energy they've depended on for ages." Merrick exhaled sharply, half laughing. So we're batteries now. Come on. You laugh, Saren said, because your mind is trying to protect itself from a truth it already knows. The garden grew quieter, though no wind moved. Lisa felt the stillness pressing around them, like invisible hands urging them to listen. Saren continued, his tone slow and tender. You have lived many lives. Not as punishment, not as a lesson, but as loops within a maze built from your own forgetfulness. Each life, you awaken as a blank slate. And each time, the Archons reinforce the illusion before you can remember the doorway out. Corin blinked. Doorway out of what? The reincarnation trap, Saren said. A cycle designed not by divinity but by those who learn to manipulate the in-between. Humanity wasn't meant to loop forever, but the Archons engineered a system where forgetting yourself becomes the default. Merrick shook his head. Why tell us this? Why now? Saren stepped closer, his eyes warm despite the gravity of his words. Because the veil is thinning. More people are feeling the hum beneath their thoughts, the sense that something old is breaking open. You felt it too. That's why you followed me. Lisa inhaled sharply. She had felt it, the quiet pull, the sense of being watched not by something sinister, but by something that wanted her to finally see. And tonight, Saren said, lowering his voice, you will remember the first thing the Archons taught you to forget. The garden seemed to brighten, though the moon had not moved. Shadows stretched gently across the ground, framing the space around them like the inside of a sacred circle. Saren raised his hands, palms up, inviting them to step forward. You are not children wandering in someone else's labyrinth, he whispered. You are fragments of the same infinite awareness that birthed stars. The Archons tremble not at your strength but at your memory. Corin's pulse quickened. Memory of what? Saren's smile was soft, almost sorrowful. Of the simplest truth of all. He breathed in deeply, allowing the silence to settle like dust. The night stilled, the air sharpened, and the garden felt suddenly alive with anticipation. When Saren finally spoke, he didn't need volume, his words vibrated through the space like a tuning fork striking the center of the soul. I am. The students froze, stunned by the simplicity. The words weren't loud, weren't dramatic, yet they carried a resonance that moved through them like a warm current. Something shifted inside Lisa's chest, something she couldn't name but had been waiting for. Merrick whispered, that's it. Yes, Saren said gently. But only when spoken as a state, not as a phrase. I am, is the moment you step out of the illusion and stand in the truth of your being. When you remember yourself, the chains fall apart. The Archons cannot hold what refuses to forget. Lisa felt her breath tremble. Corin rubbed his arms again, but this time not from fear. Merrick, for once, had no skeptical remark ready. Saren stepped back and gestured toward the center of the garden, where the moonlight gathered like a quiet invitation. Tonight, he said softly, we begin the unraveling. And with that, he walked forward, leaving the three students at the edge of the awakening that would reshape everything they thought they knew about themselves, and about the invisible forces that had whispered at the edges of their thoughts for lifetimes. The night deepened around them, but the garden felt brighter, as if the moon had lowered itself just enough to listen. The three students moved closer to Saren, drawn by something they didn't yet understand. Lisa felt her pulse slow, a gentle calm settling over her. Corin's breath softened. Even Merrick, who usually guarded every thought behind skepticism, felt the rigid edges of his doubt begin to melt. Saren stepped lightly across the stone pathway and motioned for them to gather around the moss-covered bench. The circular shape of the garden suddenly felt intentional, almost architectural, as if it had been designed for moments exactly like this. The world you know, Saren began quietly, is layered with constructs so subtle you rarely notice them. You think you're making choices, but most of the time the choices are selecting you, guided by patterns inherited from memories you can't access anymore. Merrick crossed his arms but didn't look away. You mean conditioning? Conditioning is one word for it, Saren said. But it runs deeper. The Archons built frameworks of perception, grids of belief, identity, story, and emotional reflex, that shape how you interpret everything before you even begin to think. They don't need to control your actions directly. They only need to shape the lens you use to see yourself. Lisa's lips parted slightly. She felt something inside her shift, like a forgotten piece of a puzzle sliding into place. So we're trapped by our own thoughts. Not your thoughts, Saren corrected. Your identification with them. Thoughts are tools. Beautiful, powerful tools. But when you believe the voice inside your head is you, the Archons no longer need to do anything. You police yourself on their behalf. Corin swallowed. Is that why you said, I am, is a remembering? Yes, Saren said. Your awareness is the one thing they cannot touch. They can shape emotions, plant ideas, influence dreams, and distort memories, but the pure witnessing presence beneath all of it remains untouchable. That presence is what you return to when you speak those two words from the depth of your being. Merrick frowned, the gears in his mind turning. But if they're so powerful, why bother with illusions? Why not just control people directly? Saren gave him a sad smile. Direct control creates resistance. Illusion creates compliance. Humans willingly imprison themselves when they believe the prison is who they are. The garden seemed to inhale as he spoke, the shadows contracting and expanding along the stone path like silent breaths. Saren continued, his voice as gentle as flowing water. Think of the Archons as architects of forgetting. They discovered that if they could convince you that you are small, alone, flawed, and temporary, you would hand over your awareness without question. They don't need to rule you. They just need you to disown yourself. Corin rubbed his chest, feeling an ache beneath the surface. But why? Why do they want our light? Because they lost theirs, Saren whispered. Long ago, they were beings of immense clarity. But in the collapse of a far older cycle, they separated from their own source. Imagine a star losing its core. They still exist, but without the inner light that once sustained them. Now they survive by feeding on echoes of it, splinters of awareness leaking from beings who've forgotten their brilliance. Lisa felt tears sting her eyes, though she didn't know why. Saren's words carried sorrow, not anger, not fear, just the ache of truth spoken softly after being hidden for too long. So they're not evil, Lisa said quietly. No, Saren said. Not evil. Just starving. And the starving become dangerous when desperate. Merrick looked down at his hands. And us? What are we, really? You are awareness dreaming of being human, Saren said. You are the observer, not the body, not the thoughts, not the history your mind recites. You are the stillness in which all those things appear. Corin shook his head slowly, struggling to grasp the idea. If that's true, then every fear we have is part of the illusion, Saren finished. Fear is the Archon's first architecture. A person who fears forgets. A person who forgets collapses inward. And in that collapse, their light spills out. That is the harvest. Marek's breath caught. Lisa reached out and placed a hand on the old stone bench for stability. Corin stared at the ground, unable to speak. Saren knelt beside them, his expression soft as moonlight. Listen closely. The trap is not built of metal or walls or bars. It is built of self-negation. Every moment you say, I'm not enough, or I'm broken, or I'm alone, the Archons weave another thread around your mind. Lisa whispered, but how do we break it? Saren stood and extended his hand toward the sky. The moonlight kissed his palm, casting a soft glow along his fingers. Not by fighting, he said. Not by defiance. The Archons thrive on resistance. Every battle strengthens their illusion. He lowered his hand and pressed it gently over his heart. You break the trap by remembering what cannot be trapped. Corin finally looked up. Our awareness. Yes. Saren stepped toward them again. The state of I am is not a weapon. It is a light. And illusions cannot survive light, no matter how old or complex they are. Marek's skepticism wavered. But if we remember, if everyone remembered, wouldn't the whole system collapse? It would, Saren said softly. And it is already beginning to. That's why more people feel restless. Why old beliefs break down. Why the world seems to be shaking. Humanity is nearing the edge of remembering, and the Archons know it. Lisa's voice trembled. Is that why you brought us here? Saren nodded. Each of you has touched awareness before. Not through meditation or ritual, but in quiet moments when the noise fell away, a sunrise, a deep breath after grief, a second of pure stillness where you weren't thinking, just being. The I am state is simply that moment, made continuous. And once you stabilize in it, the Archons can no longer reach you. The garden shimmered faintly, as if agreeing. Saren walked to the center of the stone ark and sat on the mossy bench with the ease of someone who had done so countless times before. You asked earlier how the trap works, he said. Now you know its foundation. In part 3, you will learn how to undo it. Marek blinked. Part 3. Saren smiled gently. Not a chapter. An experience. Tonight is the understanding. Tomorrow begins the remembering. Corin exhaled shakily, the weight of the revelation settling inside him like a second heartbeat. Lisa wiped her eyes. Marek stared at Saren as though seeing him clearly for the first time. Saren leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the moon. The machinery of the trap is old. But older still is the truth within you. It waits patiently for you to return. And the garden, silent and ancient, held the four of them in its moonlit cradle as the night continued unfolding the long-hidden architecture of the world. Morning never fully reached the forgotten garden. Even with the sun rising somewhere beyond the overgrown fence, the air held a muted glow, as if the place existed halfway between night and day. Lisa woke first, curled beside the crescent-shaped stone path where she had drifted to sleep without meaning to. Corin stirred next, rubbing his eyes, trying to recall the moment when exhaustion had overcome him. Marek sat upright already, staring into the pale light with an expression caught between disbelief and awe. Saren stood at the center of the garden, as if he had not slept at all. His posture was serene, hands loosely resting at his sides, eyes half closed like someone listening to a melody only he could hear. When he finally spoke, the gentleness in his voice pulled the others into full awareness. Last night, he said softly, you learned the architecture of the trap. Today, you learn the way out. Marek inhaled. By saying those two words. By being them, Saren corrected. Language helps, but language cannot set you free. The state beneath the words is what dissolves the illusion. The words only point toward it. The students gathered around him, the garden unusually warm despite the morning chill. Saren gestured for them to sit in a circle. Lisa lowered herself onto the dew-damp grass, feeling a pulse beneath the earth, as if something ancient stirred beneath the soil. "Close your eyes," Saren said. They did. "Now breathe," he continued, "not to calm yourself, not to focus, not to meditate. Just breathe as if nothing is missing from this moment." Lisa felt her shoulders loosen. Corin's jaw unclenched. Merrick tried to resist the instruction, but even he found the simplicity disarming. Saren's voice drifted through the quiet. "Awareness is your natural state. Thoughts are visitors. Emotions are waves. None of them are you." Corin's brow furrowed. "But I feel like they're me." "That feeling," Saren said, "is the first layer of the illusion. The Archons placed mirrors before your mind and convinced you the reflections were yourself. Every fear you have is a reflection. Every doubt. Every story about your worth or your future or your past. When you identify with the reflection, you forget the one who is seeing." Lisa took a slow breath. "How do we see the one who's seeing?" "You already do," Saren whispered. "You are doing it right now. Awareness is not something you find, it is what notices the search." Silence settled in. For a moment, the entire world seemed to exhale. Saren continued, his tone smooth and steady. "Now, before you speak the words, understand them. I am is not a statement. It is the recognition of the field in which every experience appears. It is the space where thought comes and goes. It is the presence beneath emotion. It is the quiet knowing that has never been harmed." Merrick swallowed. "Never been harmed. But we've all been." "The body has been harmed," Saren said gently. "The emotions have been bruised. The mind has been wounded by memory. But the awareness witnessing all of that has never been touched. The Archons can bend your thoughts, stir your emotions, distort your dreams, but they cannot touch the witness itself. They can only distract you from it." Lisa felt her heart soften. Corin's breath deepened. Marek's hands unclenched. Saren opened his eyes, though the students kept theirs closed. "Now say it," he whispered. "Not with effort. With recognition." A moment of stillness passed, and then Lisa quietly exhaled. "I am." Her voice trembled, not from fear but from something tender breaking open. As the words left her lips, she felt a clarity rise within her, a gentle warmth expanding in her chest, radiating outward. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was like stepping from a noisy room into a quiet one and realizing the quiet had been waiting all along. Corin followed. His voice cracked at first, but steadied with a strange, unfamiliar courage. "I am." Something in the air shifted. Shadows softened. The tension that had always lived behind his ribs slowly dissolved, replaced by a stillness he had never known. Merrick hesitated longest. He opened his mouth, closed it again, wiped his palms on his jeans. His skepticism wasn't gone, it hovered like a faint echo, but something deeper pushed through the doubt. He inhaled, feeling a tremor in his chest. "I am." The words didn't feel magical. They felt honest, shockingly so. Like telling the truth for the first time after a lifetime of pretending. Saren smiled softly. "What you felt," he said, "is the door opening. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. The Archons cannot enter that state. They cannot perceive it. To them, it is as invisible as sunlight is to a creature of shadows. Lisa opened her eyes, blinking away tears she hadn't noticed forming. But, how do we stay in it? I don't know how to hold on to that feeling. You don't hold it, Saren said. You relax into it. The state of I am disappears when you try to grasp it. Effort is the mind's domain. Awareness is effortless. Corin leaned forward. So the more we try, the further we get from it. Exactly, Saren nodded. The trap is made of trying. Trying to be better, trying to be worthy, trying to fix yourself, trying to find meaning. The Archons use the trying to keep you searching instead of seeing. The I am state is not a destination. It is what remains when the searching stops. A breeze drifted across the garden, brushing the grass in a slow wave. The students felt something subtle lift from their thoughts, like dust swirling off an old surface. Saren's voice softened further. Now comes the next part. When you live as the I am, the shadows of the mind, the fears, the doubts, the wounds, will rise to the surface. Not to attack you. To free you. They are the residues of every life you've lived. The Archons cling to those residues, using them to pull you back into forgetting. Marek's eyes widened. So we're going to face them? Yes, Saren said. But not by fighting. By witnessing. You do not battle a shadow. You stand in light until it fades. Lisa felt a calm resolve settling into her bones. Corin nodded slowly. Marek inhaled deeply. Saren looked at each of them with quiet pride. Tonight, the illusions begin to unravel. Tomorrow, the Archons will notice. They always do when someone remembers. But you will not be alone in what comes next. He placed one hand over his heart. For now, simply remain aware. Every breath is a doorway. Every moment is a chance to return to the I am. The students closed their eyes again, letting the silence cradle them. And in that silence, something awakened, a presence older than memory, softer than breath, shining like a distant star rediscovering its glow. The remembering had begun. The sun dipped again toward the horizon, painting the sky in muted oranges that barely touched the forgotten garden. A soft twilight settled over the space, neither fully day nor night, an in-between realm that felt perfectly suited for what was about to unfold. Lisa, Corin, and Marek stood near the crescent-shaped stone path, each of them quieter than they had ever been. It wasn't the silence of confusion or fear anymore. It was the silence that follows a deep inward shift, the kind a person feels after seeing a truth they cannot unsee. Saren approached them with slow, deliberate steps. Though his presence hadn't changed, something around him had. The air shimmered faintly at the edge of his silhouette, as if the world itself was adjusting to accommodate a deeper brightness within him. Tonight, he said gently, the Archons will test what you have remembered. Corin's breath caught. Lisa's fingers curled around the fabric of her sleeve. Marek straightened his shoulders as if bracing for impact. Saren smiled faintly, soothing their tension. Do not imagine them as monsters or demons. They have no form of their own. They appear through your forgotten echoes, your fears, your stories, the things you haven't yet forgiven in yourself. They will not strike you. They will tempt you to forget. Marek exhaled shakily. Forget the I am state. Yes, Saren said. They cannot dim awareness, but they can lure you back into identifying with the mind. If you mistake thought for truth, emotion for identity, memory for self, you slip into the old trap. Lisa closed her eyes, steadying herself. So what do we do? You remember, Saren whispered. Not loudly. Not forcefully. Quietly. Effortlessly. He placed his hand on his heart. Even if your voice shakes, you return to I am. A wind stirred, startling a few petals from a wild blossom at the garden's edge. The students waited, watching their teacher. Saren gestured toward the stone bench. Sit. Something is already moving. They obeyed. The moment all three settled, the air thickened, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The garden's edges darkened, not as a threat, but as a presence. Lisa felt the air around her shift like a dream turning. Corin shivered. Marek's jaw tightened. Shadows gathered at the periphery of the garden's circle, not shapes but movements, a folding of darkness that echoed the outlines of memories. The Archons never appeared clearly. Their influence manifested through what a person feared most, through echoes of moments left unresolved. Lisa was the first to see her echo take form. Across the garden, a faint silhouette of her younger self appeared, fragile, small, holding the weight of mistakes she had never forgiven. Tears stung her eyes. She whispered, I don't want to see this. Saren touched her shoulder. You are not seeing her. You are seeing the belief that you were her. Lisa inhaled softly, then exhaled. The silhouette trembled as if weakening. She placed a hand on her chest. I am. The shadow dissolved like mist at sunrise. Corin felt something push at the edges of his mind, a whisper of inadequacy, the silent pressure he had carried for years, telling him he was never enough. It swirled around him like cold wind, tightening his breath. It feels too strong, he said through clenched teeth. Saren closed his eyes. It only feels strong because you've believed it for so long. Breathe. Be the witness. Corin shook his head, trembling. It's telling me. I'll fail. Then answer, Saren whispered. Corin inhaled. Slowly. Fully. Then softly, but with growing steadiness. I am. The pressure cracked, breaking like thin glass. Warmth flooded his chest. Now the darkness turned toward Marek. His echo did not appear as a memory, it came as a voice. A voice that sounded like his own, polished by years of skepticism, cynicism, and disbelief. This is nonsense, the voice hissed. You're fooling yourself. There is no awakening. There is no freedom. You're just running from your own emptiness. Marek's hands shook. His breath became shallow. Saren stepped closer. This one will be harder for you. Not because it is stronger, but because it speaks the language of your mind. The whisper within Marek deepened. It's all in your head. You're imagining everything. Marek's heart pounded. I don't know if I can do this. Saren knelt in front of him, eyes steady. You don't defeat this voice by proving it wrong. You defeat it by not needing to prove anything. Marek's breath hitched. So, what do I do? You remember, Saren said. Even if the mind screams. Whisper it with your last ounce of clarity. Marek closed his eyes. The voice inside him rose in volume, throwing every doubt, every argument, every logical dismissal at him. His chest tightened. But beneath the noise, there was a softness. A stillness he had touched last night. He reached for it, not with force, but with surrender. A single breath. Then another. And then, quietly, with tears slipping down his cheeks. I A.M. The inner voice shattered. The echo vanished. A profound silence spread through Marek's chest, the kind he had never felt before, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of presence. The shadows at the edge of the garden recoiled. The air shifted, warm again. The illusions had dissolved.
Saren rose to his feet. You have crossed the first threshold. The Archons tested your weakest points, the cracks through which forgetting enters. You did not fight. You remembered. Lisa wiped her tears. Corin exhaled deeply. Merrick steadied his trembling hands. Saren looked at them with quiet pride. This is awakening, he said. Not a moment of glory. A steady returning. Again and again. Until one day, you no longer leave. The garden brightened as the moon rose higher. What happens now? Lisa asked softly. Now, Saren said, you walk in the world as the I Am. Not loudly. Not as teachers. As reminders. Quiet awakenings in a world built on forgetting. Corin nodded. Merrick closed his eyes with newfound peace. Lisa whispered, and the Archons? They will continue whispering, Saren said gently. But you will no longer listen. The night wrapped around them like a promise. The remembering was no longer beginning. It had begun. As the moonlight thinned into the coming dawn, the garden seemed to exhale with them, 3 students who had stepped into themselves for the first time, and a wanderer who had simply reminded them of what they had never truly lost. The world outside that small forgotten space hadn't changed, not yet. The news would still speak in the language of fear. People would still hurry through their days, wearing the weight of beliefs handed to them by generations of forgetting. But something subtle had shifted. A single thread in the vast tapestry of humanity had been tugged loose, and through that loosened thread, light had begun to seep in.
Awakening is never dramatic. It isn't fireworks and revelations and cosmic visions. It's the soft return to a presence that was always here, waiting beneath the noise. It's the discovery that the voice in your head is not the one who lives behind your eyes. It's remembering that the fears you carry are echoes, not prophecies. And more than anything, it's the gentle realization that the I Am within you is older than any lifetime you've lived, any story you've been told, and any illusion the world built around you. The Archons will whisper, but now you know their language. Doubt will rise, but now you know its game. Old wounds will surface, but now you know how to witness them without drowning. Your path from here is simple, though not always easy. Return, again and again, to the presence that cannot be touched. If this story opened something in you, if it stirred a recognition, softened a weight, or made you pause even for a moment, then I invite you deeper into this journey. Please subscribe so we can continue exploring these hidden pathways together. Give this video a like if it resonated with you. And share it with someone who might be ready to remember.